Hey, President Trump, as you know, threatening to fire or do mass firings of federal workers as the U.S. hurdles towards a shutdown with Democrats and Republicans at an impasse over funding the government. That shutdown would happen at midnight tonight. For more at what's at stake and who may be pulling some of the strings on what may happen at the executive branch if indeed a shutdown happens, Nathan Dean is with us, Bloomberg Intelligence senior policy analyst out there in Washington, D.C., and right here in our New York studio, Max Chafkin, co-host of Everybody's Business podcast, author of The Contrarian, Peter Thiel, and Silicon Valley's Pursuit of Power. Nathan, I want to shoot it out to you first. Where are we on the shutdown? What might cause this actual shutdown? What is it that the Republicans want or won't do? What is it that Democrats want and won't do?
So right now, both sides aren't really talking to each other. They're sort of in this weird waiting game at the moment as we get closer to midnight. Now, I think the Democratic, from their perspective, there are two wants going into this shutdown. The first is really being driven by the House progressives, and that is they want to be seen being very tough in combating President Trump on his policies. The other thing they want is they want an extension to ACA or Obamacare subsidies that are going to be expiring at the end of the year. From the Republican perspective, their wants are a little bit different. They've already passed via the House what is known as a clean CR that gets us through November 20th. And generally speaking, the party that passes that clean CR feels that they have a moral high ground. Now, I woke up this morning thinking that there was a chance that we would not go into a government shutdown and that something would happen to make a deal. But as we get closer and closer to midnight, it begins to sound like both parties feel that they are in the best political position possible and that both sides think that a shutdown will end up helping them politically. And that's usually what happens when you have a shutdown. So if a shutdown does occur, we'll wake up tomorrow and we'll have to deal with the short-term impacts because I don't think this is going to go more than a week or so. I think really the next real negotiation point, if the government shuts down, will be next week when the House Republicans return.
Well, Nathan, what are the political implications of a government shutdown? You said both sides think that a shutdown will help their own side, but what are the implications? We have a little bit of history to look to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the best case scenarios is go back to the Tea Party of 2013. And there's this very similar playbook that it's happening to that. Now, from the Democratic perspective, they want to be able to essentially combat President Trump. Their approval ratings, not that good at the moment. And, there's plenty of time between now and November 2026 to be able to turn that messaging and at least start to build momentum off of that. Now, there is some local politics here at play. Virginia and New Jersey both have governor races in November. I would anticipate if President Trump and the Office of Management and Budget were to begin to follow through with mass firings of government workers, that's going to impact Virginia and Maryland pretty significantly. I would expect those policymakers to come in and say, maybe we should stop this and turn things around here. But if the shutdown occurs and Democrats start to take the blame, then I think you'll see those politicians in Virginia and New Jersey get a little nervous.
It's like you just delivered a ball into my court perfectly. You mentioned the OMB, which takes us to Russell Vogt. Max, you wrote an in-depth profile earlier this year, back in April. It was a big take. You talked about the architect behind President Trump's imperial presidency. Vogt, not usually out in front in the Oval Office or at a White House press conference, and yet he was yesterday afternoon along with the Republican leadership. He was front and center. He went to the mic, made some comments outside the White House after that meeting in the White House with minority leaders. Remind us who this guy is. He's very, very influential when it comes to the Trump White House.
Yeah, as you said, Carol, he is the head of the Office of Management and Budget. But I think more importantly, he is one of these kind of behind the scene intellectuals who helped shape this presidency, who worked on Project 2025, who basically after Trump's last term spent 4 years essentially planning for what this presidency was going to look like. And Trump, and we talked about this a lot, at the beginning of the year, but Trump was unusual because all these people around him had a long time to plan. And a big part of the plan, of course, is massive cuts to the budget and massive cuts, crucially, to the federal workforce. We saw a little bit of that, or more than a little, I'd say, with Doge and Elon Musk's efforts, and this has been going back and forth. But a budget shutdown, a government shutdown, would be a huge opportunity for Vogt and for people who are sort of aligned in this direction to do something that they've wanted to do for a very long time, which is essentially take a bite out of the federal government.
So what is this opportunity, Max, for him, for his role at OMB, but also his role in Project 2025 and shaping what he wants the presidency to look like.
So the ideological idea is that there is this kind of like fourth branch of government, like, you know, you sometimes hear people talk about the deep state or something like that. This is the idea that there are civil servants who are operating outside of the realm of the president, who are just doing whatever they want. This is an attack, of course, that Donald Trump sort of pioneered during his first presidency when he would complain about the deep state. And Vogt's idea is to weaken this, and weaken it both by making it more responsive to the president. And like that's a key part. When you hear people talk about the unitary executive idea, it's the idea that the president, not these, you know, quote unquote unelected bureaucrats, should be deciding, you know, what the government does. But also because there's going to be they've wanted to fire people for a long time, and you're going to have a government shutdown. You could imagine Vogt and others inside of the Trump administration seeing this as an opportunity to do something very drastic and blame it on the Democrats, and be able to say, hey, this wasn't, because it didn't really work during the Doge episode, because people got mad at Elon Musk, and you had a lot of Democrats sort of beating the drum about saying, oh, you're waiting for Social Security to talk to somebody at the Social Security office. That's Elon Musk did that, and that made Musk very unpopular. It also caused Trump to kind of back off. You know, he had talked initially about using a chainsaw, and then he was like, oh no, we're actually using a scalpel. But now, if we have a government shutdown and the Trump administration is able to blame it on Democrats, then maybe that gives them the ability to try to do something more drastic they weren't able to do earlier.
So Nathan, how exactly do these job cuts work in a government shutdown? And this isn't just something specific to a Trump White House, right? I mean, does any president have the ability to cut jobs, cut costs, if you will, in a government shutdown?
Well, you know, obviously this is a new legal issue that's going to most likely come up if it happens. But one thing that we've already noted is that Russ Vought, when he's provided guidance to agencies in terms of deeming who is essential and who is not essential, he said specifically that those individuals that are working on reduction in force plans should be deemed essential. And there's this theory out there that if the Congress isn't available to essentially do its job, then the White House has to come in and step in and do it for them. So I would say, though, that you know, right now we're in the state between the Republicans and Democrats where both sides are essentially talking past each other, and there's a lot of threats going on. But I would also remind folks that Doge cuts weren't popular with just the average American because of the reasons Max was laying out there. And so even though you're hearing threats like 750,000 government workers will be furloughed and a lot of them may not come back, you know, there is this ultimate decision that's going to be made by the president. And if Congress comes together and makes a deal by, say, early next week, I think they'll be able to get in front of the OMB and stave off a lot of these job cuts.
But it does make me think, Nathan, about the power of the purse and the whole idea of, you know, a balance of powers. It's why we have these three different branches of government, right? And what does it mean if ultimately, though, the power of the purse is not in the hands of Congress?
Well, and this is what the Supreme Court is sort of moving forward with at the moment, with this idea of being able to claw back unappropriated funds and this pocket rescissions that we saw come forth right before the month of September. And what I would say here is that, you know, Congress obviously does not like it. Republicans and Democrats alike do not like it when the White House decides that, yes, you've spent all this time appropriating and we're just going to claw it back anyway, which is why I think eventually we could be in a scenario where, you know, this government shutdown may be the norm over the next few weeks, because even if we get a deal, it's not going to be a 12 appropriation bill sign off full budget like we haven't seen in many, many years. It's going to be another kick of the can. And as we get closer to November and as we get closer to March, meaning the end of these Obamacare subsidies, and then further into the election year, both sides are going to want to play for more political points. And so even if there's a deal that's done next week, we could be talking about a shutdown again in early 2026.
Hey, Max, you wrote this story back in April about Russell Vought. To what extent is his vision for government coming true right now, and how much does the government shutdown play into that?
Well, I think
provide an opportunity
I think the point
for it?
that this is still in flux, and I think there's a question about. It's true that Russ Vought and people who are aligned with him would very much like to drastically cut back on the government. They don't care if it's politically unpopular at the moment. Trump, of course, cares a lot about that, and we've seen over the years that he can be responsive to pushback from either constituents or in polling and so on. And so I think that we just don't, I think, know how this is going to play. I will say the question of the courts, like Vought has basically said that they plan to challenge this thing called the Impoundment Control Act, which is a 1974 law that Congress passed, essentially forcing the president to spend the money that had been appropriated and then creating this mechanism to ask for rescissions, like a legal mechanism. Vogt has said they're going to follow the law, but he's also said that the law, he believes that the law is unconstitutional. And so that could be where this is heading, like a legal battle that will pit essentially the Trump administration against Congress.
Hey, last question to you, Nathan. We have a terminal user sending me a message, and I think this is a fair one because he writes in, both sides have said the bloated federal government needs to be trimmed massively. Why should anyone be against that? I mean, there is something to that. And, you know, it kind of begs the question, why can't everybody get along and figure out a smart way forward? Just got about 30 seconds here.
You know, if it was easy, they would have already done it. I mean, we're talking about the Federal Register has over 430,000 pages, and this is all the regulations. So if you have to go through and you have to decide what to cut, you have to comb through 430,000 pages and ultimately decide if you're going to cut something, it doesn't break a statute or a regulation. It's just not easy because both sides said they would want to do it, but if they wanted to do it, they would have already done it.
Yeah, the answer to that question is voters. Voters don't want to cut. And when they've showed it over and over again.
Right, exactly. Just, yeah, somebody else, but not in my state or my territory. Guys, unbelievable. We wanted to do this yesterday. We had a lot of news flow. So glad we could have you back. Nathan Dean, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Policy Analyst, Max Chafkin, co-host of the Everybody's Business podcast, author of The Contrarian. Unbelievable. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the demographic shift that's underway, Tim.
Yeah, when it comes